Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. This is the e-commerce version 2 project part 6. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to write and run queries with Elasticsearch. So we are going to recap some of the skills we learned previously, but this time we're going to then move that forward and integrate Elasticsearch with DRF. If you head over to the main homepage and go over to the Django project version 2 playlist, you can see this is going to finish the trilogy of tutorials that we started in part 4. So first of all, we went through the basics, if you haven't already seen that, of Elasticsearch, and then we moved on and went through the underpinning skills of utilizing the Django REST framework. So this tutorial just finishes that small trilogy of tutorials where we now integrate Elasticsearch with the Django REST framework. This tutorial, like the previous tutorials here in this trilogy of tutorials, is to provide us some underpinning skills to make it easier for us to understand what's happening later on in the project once we start developing with a test-first approach, utilizing Django DRF and Elasticsearch, building up our product inventory application and the search application. So it is an optional step. We will cover this again later in the main timeline of this project. But like I said, this is hopefully to provide you some kind of underpinning knowledge. And also for those who aren't following the project, it just gives you some information about how to integrate Elasticsearch with DRF. If you are new to this project, you'll find a link in the video description to the GitHub repository. You just need to go ahead and download that however you do that. And then we're going to need the code from part 5. So we will start from the code in part 5. So go ahead and download the code for this tutorial. We will be starting from where we left off in part 5. So go ahead and download and open it up with Visual Studio Code or whatever IDE that you're using. So I've gone ahead and opened up part 5. I've made a new folder called part 6, and I've gone ahead and moved the part 5 code from the repository into this folder. So now I need to make a virtual environment. So here I'm in Mac, so I'm going to run virtual env and then venv, the name of the folder. So that's going to create a virtual environment. If you're running Windows, you're going to need to type in something slightly different, of course. So if you are new to this, you'll probably type in Windows, for example, it's going to be, for example, pi, and then you're probably -m or flag m, then venv, venv. So that'll be a Windows machine. So once you've done that, let's go ahead and activate. So here in Mac, I'm going to type in source. Again, it's going to be different on Windows. So source, and then the name of the folder. Inside of there, we've got the bin. Inside of that, we've got activate. So on Windows, you're going to probably type in venv /, that's important, /scripts /activate. So that's activating that. So let's go ahead and install all the requirements. So pip install -r. So same on Windows or Mac, and then requirements. That's going to install all the requirements to get this application working correctly. So once that's done, let's go ahead now and install everything that we need for Django Elasticsearch. So you can already see that it's probably already installed in the requirements. So let's just go through those motions. Essentially, there's 3 packages here that's going to be installed by installing Django Elasticsearch DSL. The first package, Elasticsearch. The second will be Elasticsearch DSL. So Elasticsearch, think of that as the official kind of Python client for Elasticsearch. And then the Elasticsearch DSL is a high-level kind of library for writing and running queries against the Elasticsearch instance. And then we have the Django Elasticsearch DSL, which is essentially a wrapper around the Elasticsearch DSL to allow us to integrate Django with Elasticsearch. So let's go ahead and copy that. Okay, you already see that I've installed this, and it was going to then go ahead and try and install some of these other dependencies. You can see it was going to try and install Elasticsearch and Elasticsearch DSL. So you don't need to do that individually. You can just run the Django Elasticsearch DSL. Okay, so with that installed, You may need to kind of pip update your requirements. So pip freeze, and then let's run the update. So just finally, before we get started, let's just make sure that we have some data. So if you go into e-commerce, you've got the demo and we've got the inventory app. So you'll probably find that the fixtures aren't incorporated. So you're going to need to go back to the repository. So we are going to need some data, some fixtures here in our database. So go ahead and just navigate to part 3 of this tutorial series. And then in the e-commerce inventory app, you'll find a fixtures folder. So you just need to download those and put those in your inventory app. So I'll just go ahead and make a new folder here called Fixtures. So I've gone ahead and moved my fixtures into the fixtures folder. So next up, we are utilizing, if you go into the Docker and Compose file, you can see that we are utilizing Docker. So you're going to need Docker installed for this. And you can see that we're going to just spin up a Postgres database. So go ahead and grab a Docker or copy of a Docker desktop if you haven't already installed that. And then all you need to do from here is now just type in Docker Compose and then up and then use -D here so it doesn't bring up the terminal. So that should start a new container. That might take a little bit longer on yours because I've already got the image downloaded for Postgres. And so that should bring up that container for the database. But of course, we're also going to need an instance for Elasticsearch. So we're going to need to make a new container for that too. And we already done that in the previous tutorial and the code is already here still. So we can just activate that and that's going to create a new container for Elasticsearch or run Elasticsearch essentially. So we are going to just run that again. And now we should have a separate container. There we go. So we now have a separate container here for search and our Elasticsearch server, as well as the database server. So now we've got all the services up and running. Let's go ahead and migrate. So before we migrate all this data over to the database, let's just make sure that there isn't anything in the migrations. Okay. So now we can go ahead and migrate. Now we did make a management command for this. It was just called load fixtures, basically just run, make migrations and migrate, and then just loaded all the data from the fixtures. So you can go ahead and just run that command. So Python 3 manage.py and then load fixtures. So it says here, no module named REST framework. Seems to be an error. So I'm just going to run the pip install REST framework again. I'll try that again, load fixtures. Seems to be good this time. Maybe there was just an issue with the REST framework installation. So this is going to take some time potentially on your machine because there's just so many fixtures, and I do apologize. In the next tutorial, we're going to strip everything right back again and go ahead and move forward using a test up first approach, developing our inventory app with Django DRF. And I'll slim down these fixtures. So like I said in the previous tutorial, I wanted to move this tutorial series slightly differently and kind of scale this up really quickly to do some performance management. But it just didn't work out that way. So again, apologize. It's going to take a few minutes to install all of those fixtures. But once we've done, we'll move ahead. Actually, while it's doing that, let's go ahead and add what we need to the installed apps. So we have already installed from the previous tutorial the REST framework. So we just need to integrate back into this all of the Elasticsearch tools. So let's go ahead and now add we're going to need to install the Django Elasticsearch tool. Okay. I think that's pretty much all that we need at this point. Oh, and we created the search app, of course. So let's just make sure we've got that in place. So ecommerce.search. That was a new app that we built, and inside of here, we actually haven't built that app yet. Okay. So now we've installed Elasticsearch, something else that we're going to need to do here is at the bottom here, let's go ahead and just define this new Elasticsearch instance that we have running. So we just need to define where that is, tell Django where to find Elasticsearch server. So let's say default, and then that's going to be hosts, and then where to find it, well, it's localhost, and then it uses the port 9200, so that's where it's going to find Elasticsearch. Okay, so now we defined that. Previously, I'm not too sure if I started this, I created a search folder here for a new app. So I was just describing the fact that previously we've been moving into this folder in order to create a new application, whereas we don't necessarily need to do that. So we created a new folder, mkdir, and then we describe where we wanted that folder to be created, e-commerce / and then search. Obviously it exists, and then we can go ahead and type in Python 3 manage.py. Let's start a new app. We're going to go into the e-commerce folder and into the search folder. So that's where it needs to be located, but obviously it says here we haven't actually given it an app name. So let's call this search, and there we go. So that creates a new app in this location, in this directory that we created. So there it is there. So let's go into here. Let's just make sure that we connect this up properly. So we do a bit of that, and then go into settings. Let's just make sure, I think we've already added it to settings, haven't we? ecommerce.search. And there we go. So we created a new app. So now let's move ahead and start to now create a document so that we can then start to connect Elasticsearch with DRF. So we already have DRF set up from the previous tutorial. It looks like we finished off by creating a view set here for category, or we set up a category, a way of collecting all of the, well, let's have a look, collecting all of the shoes related to a category. So run the server. So just going in and running the server here. So /category. That's not going to work because we need the port number. 8000 / and then we needed some sort of slug, so some sort of category, basketball or baseball, I think there was an item. So it's producing or returning results. That's where we ended off previously. So what we want to do now is we want to be able to use Elasticsearch to do all the heavy work to search for the data, and then we want to filter that through Django DRF, the serializers, to then display that information back to the user. So let's go ahead now and define what it is we want to actually index and store for essentially in Elasticsearch. So we created a new in-search file called documents. So let's go ahead and import some of the tools that we're going to need. So from the Django Elasticsearch DSL, let's import some tools, document, so that we can start to define what tables and fields we want to actually integrate or utilize with Elasticsearch. And then we'll go ahead and import registry so we can register that with Elasticsearch. And let's then go ahead and import some models that we're going to need. So let's bring in the product inventory table and then also the products table. So I'll just quickly move this in line by line. It is very similar to what we previously created in the previous tutorial. But essentially here, we're going to run the declarator here so that we can register a document. We're then going to create a new class. I'm just going to call this product inventory document. So this is going to be the defining what I want to index from the product inventory table. So here we bring in document, and then from that we extend and we create a class index. So name equals product inventory. So that's what I'm going to call the index, product inventory. and then class Django. So model equals product inventory. So here I'm just defining the model from which I'm working from, and now I can go ahead and define the fields I want to work with. So I need to make sure here that if I'm utilizing this with Django DRF, I want to be able to match this to my serializers. So whatever data is here needs to kind of match my serializer. So by that I mean that, for example, if I go into my DRF serializer, I'm going to need to make sure that the serializer I've created down here, you can see that I'm expecting all these fields potentially, so they're not going to be resolved. So let's go ahead and just define what I've just created there. So that was ID, SKU, store price, and is default. So we need store price and is default, SKU, and ID. So we also need the ID. I'm also just going to remove some of these other aspects here just for now. I'm not going to need those, just to simplify my serializer just for now. Okay, so that's what I've ended up with here in my serializer. So in basic terms, what I have now is I have an instance here where I'm telling Elasticsearch what to actually index in the Elasticsearch server, if you like. I'm then matching the fields to my serializer in DRF so that when I do integrate them together, they are going to work nicely. So these fields here are what's being expected. So I've matched those fields. So let's go ahead now in search and in our views. Let's go ahead and now tie this together, DRF with Elasticsearch. Okay, so we're not going to need the render there. So let's first of all, from the REST framework, let's just bring in the tools that we're going to need here. So views, let's import, for example, API view. So we'll just use API view. Okay, so let's create a new class. Let's call this search product inventory. We're going to bring in API view. And also we want to be able to paginate. So let's also, from the REST framework, because we've got quite a lot of data, I just want to make sure that we're paginating here. So sorry, REST framework dot pagination. Let's go ahead and import the limit offset pagination. Okay, so we're going to bring in pagination. So let's bring that also into our class here. So while we're talking about pagination, let's just go into settings. At the bottom here, we just need to define this. Now, we've already done that in the previous tutorial. So just to mention that in the REST framework here, we got the default pagination class. We've already brought that in. And then we've already defined that pagination, there should be 10 items per page. So back in our view, let's go ahead now and define our product serializer. So product inventory serializer. So let's bring this in and prepare this. That equals the product. We're going to need to bring this in. Inventory serializer. So we are going to need to incorporate that in. So that's from ecommerce.drf. So go into the DRF folder. Inside of there, we've got our serializer. And then from there, we're going to need to import the product inventory serializer. So we're going to need that. And then let's go ahead and now create our search. So we're going to say search document, defining the data that's created in Elasticsearch server. So this is going to be product inventory document, product inventory document. So we're going to need to bring that in from the documents. Let's do exactly that. So from ecommerce.search.document serializer. Oh no, document, sorry. And let's go ahead and import that. So the product inventory document. Okay, so if you are new to API View, it's worth having a quick read through the API guide views here. So essentially here, what we're doing is we're building an API view, and this provides some different handlers methods, for example, get and post. So we're going to override get here. So essentially what we're doing is we're going to create a get method so that when someone navigates to our endpoint and requests or some information using get, then we're going to perform an action, and that's going to be the search function. So let's go ahead and build a new function called get. Okay, so that's going to handle our get requests. We'll bring in self, the request, and query. So what is query? Okay. So we are going to send a request, and in that request, we're going to pass through the query. So that's why we have query here. Right, so next up then, we need to think about, well, this service may not be working. Elasticsearch server may be down. So let's go ahead and use a try accept. So there may be some sort of an exception. So there may be a problem. So in which case we're going to just handle that. We're just going to return HTTP response. So we're going to need to bring this tool in, and then we can give it a status, whatever that might be. Okay, so for example, if the service isn't running for some particular reason, then we're just going to return the error. So let's just make sure we've got that. So at the top here, from Django.htdp, let's go ahead and import that. So let's just break this down a second again. So for example, we're going to create this as an endpoint. So we're then going to pass some data. So imagine we're making a search. We're searching for some shoes. So we defined we wanted to search for all the red shoes. So this query would hold, for example, red. So let's go ahead now and build a query. So let's just say Q equals, and then we can use Q as like a short way of creating a query instance. So let's go ahead now and create a simple kind of return. So here we're going to utilize multi-match. Check out the documentation if you're not too sure what a multi-match is, but multi-match query builds on the match query to allow multi-field query. So it just allows us to define a multi-field query. Now just notice that we're going to need to import Q. So from Elasticsearch DSL, let's import Q. Okay, so we've got a multi-match, so a multi-field query if you like, and let's go ahead and kind of query something. So we're now going to bring in our query first. So let's just say query equals query, and then let's go ahead and create some fields. Fields. I'll spell this right in a second. Fields. There we go. Equals. And now we're just going to define some fields. So the fields that we've got available, let's have a look. So back in our document here, ID SKU. So apologies to kind of confuse things here if I have done. So our query is going to have, for example, color equals red. So, but let's just do SKU. So let's start with that. So in here we've got SKU field. Okay, so we're going to query against that. So we're going to pass through our query potentially the number of our SKU, for example. So let's go ahead and define our field SKU here. That's what we want to kind of query against, if you like. So once we've got that in place, that's pretty much everything that we're going to need at this point. We're essentially going to pass in a query, our SKU, if you like, and then we're going to run it against this field here. So let's just finish this off. So we're going to say, for example, search equals self.document, our search document, sorry. Yep. And then we're going to run search. Okay, so search function. And then we want to run our query. So our query is now Q. Okay, and then what we can now do is run this query. Response equals search dot execute. Just checking here, the syntax here, we're going to need a comma. Okay, so just fix that little error there. Right, so now we've got the response. So let's go ahead now and integrate this with DRF. So let's say, for example, results equals self dot, we're going to use the pagination. And then let's bring in the response. And then the request. And then the view equals self. And then we just need to sort out the serializer. So serializer equals, and that's going to be self.serializer, which was, we called that the product inventory serializer. And from there, we're going to pass in the results. Obviously, many is going to equal true in this case. And then we just need to now return. So return self.get paginated response, and then the serializer dot data. So now let's go ahead and run this through a URL. So we're going to need some sort of URL here. So let's just build a simple endpoint for this. So path, let's call this search slash, and then we're going to take in a string, which is going to be called query. So that matches that up. And then next up, we're then going to need the view. Okay, so let's bring that in. So from Ecommerce dot search dot view, let's go ahead and import the search product inventory. So we're going to need to connect this endpoint up with that, and then dot as underscore view. Okay. So let's go ahead and turn this on. So it looks like we're already started, so maybe there isn't any problems. Let's go back to our endpoint here. Okay, so let's go through, type in search. So you can see that we've probably got this endpoint here. So let's go in and type something here. Oh. So we need to type in an API, an SKU. And you can see that it's not found. All right, so index not found, no such index. Okay, so what we haven't done just yet, apologies, we haven't actually built the index yet. So we're going to need to do that. So inside of our terminal here, we basically just need to populate the Elasticsearch index with everything that we've defined. So Python 3 manage.py and then search underscore index, like we did in the first tutorial. So that's going to build the indexes. Okay, so that's that done. So let's go back here and refresh. We're going to run our server again. And you can see that we haven't returned any results. So because obviously that SKU doesn't exist. So let's go into our inventory fixtures. Let's have a look at one of the product inventory SKUs. This is the product inventory. So here we have an SKU, a valid SKU. So let's go ahead and try this out. So we're going to search against our new index in the Elasticsearch for this product, and you can see we're now returning that product. So at this point, just to recap, what we have now is a Elasticsearch server. In this server, we've generated some indexes that we want to run data against. And of course, the whole point of that is obviously it performs much more effectively if we generate these indexes utilizing Elasticsearch. It's going to take less time to serve that data, to find that data, and then to serve that data. So the whole point of Elasticsearch in this case is to utilize it as a very fast way of finding data, for example, in a search case, to return that data to the user. So what we've done is we've gone ahead, we've already pre-installed DRF. We've defined what data we want to actually index in Elasticsearch. We've just used that command to then actually run and create that index. And then in the views, what we had here, we first of all defined our serializer in DRF and our document that we've just created, the items that we want to index. And then we've gone ahead and we've overridden the API view get, so that we run a command when we run the get request to this endpoint. And you can see here we're trying to run this simple query here. So we send the data through, so that's the SKU number. So here, for example, this number here is being passed through to query. So we're then running this against the SKU field in the index, and then we're returning some data. So we go ahead and run our query. And then what we do with that, we then run that through the pagination, so we can paginate that data if multiple data is returned, obviously not in this case. And we run it through the serializers, and then we return the data. So by doing that, allows us to run through DRF, so we can then go ahead and, for example, create a new URL. So the search product inventory URL, you notice that we've done that, and we're passing in the query parameter, in this case the SKU number. So let's just go through a different example here. So we've got a search option now. Potentially we could utilize this as now a search application in our application. So typically users are going to be utilizing names of products to search. So let's now adapt this to the name. Right, so back in our views then, let's go ahead now and adapt this. So we're going to use multi-match again. We're going to run the query, but this time the fields is going to be the product.name. So this is the database that we're working with currently. Now, what we're going to do here, we're starting in the product inventory table. We're going to run a search functionality so that we can find items in this table utilizing the name. But you notice that the name is over here. Now, for those who haven't been following this tutorial, we created this new product table, and the whole idea is that, for example, a product, a pair of shoes, would have multiple different colors and sizes. So in reality, in your stock room, you want to store all the products you're storing in your stock room. So the red shoe, the blue shoe of the same shoe type. So this is what the product inventory table was for, basically holding the information about every single product or sub-product from the main product. So like I said, if you've got one pair of shoes, that's going to have multiple colors. So we want to store that in the product inventory table. So here we're going to use the foreign key link to link across to the name, and we're going to search for all the items in here related to the particular name that we're going to pass in. So this is why here I've typed in the field product.name. So what we have here is a foreign key product. So we're traversing this table through the link here to get to that name, utilizing product.name. So we're going to need to make sure everything else matches up now. So in the document here, we're going to make a few changes. We're going to need to define the product. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say here product equals field dot object. So we're going to bring in, we went through this process of utilizing foreign keys in the last tutorial. So we're just utilizing the same knowledge, or just building from that knowledge. So properties, properties equals, and then we're just going to define the field that we want to use, which is name, and that's going to be a text field. So fields dot text field. I seem to have a problem today writing field. Right, so we've defined from the product link, if you like, foreign key, go to that table and get the name field. So that's what we're defining there. And we're essentially just extending the fields, because we are now also expecting the product field. So because we are running through this through the serializers, we're also going to need to update that. So head over to your serializers here. Let's go ahead and add product. And then we just need to define that. So product equals product serializer. So we do have a product serializer already created. And then many equals false. Read only. Let's just set that to true. Okay, so that's the product. So let's go into the product serializer. You can see here we're expecting lots of fields. Now we're just going to change this to just name, because otherwise that's potentially going to cause problems. It's going to be expecting all the other fields. So at the moment we're just having name. So if you are going to utilize more, you just need to add more to these. So we're just defining name here. So that just matches up nicely here with what we're expecting, just returning the name. Okay, so you can see that the server is on. Looks like it's going to work okay. So let's go ahead and have a look to see if this is working. So we're just going to refresh this. So nothing is returned, obviously, because we're still using the SKU. So now we're going to need a product name. So let's go back into the inventory. If I can find it, the inventory fixtures. So we're going to need to go into the product fixtures this time. Let's go for this name here. Now notice that we are using name and there's spaces. So we're probably going to have to use, for example, plus here. So let's go back into our browser. So let's place the plus in between. Run that. And you can see that we are getting an error because I'm still using the SKU. Okay, so nothing is returned. So it's not returning anything. Well, the reason why that is because we've updated the document. We're now including this in our index. And of course, we now need to rebuild our index so that is included. So let's go back to manage.py search index rebuild. So let's go ahead and rebuild. So that's going to take a couple of seconds to rebuild. Once we've done that, we now have that data now in our index on the Elasticsearch server, so we can then go and actually return something, hopefully. So it's finished indexing. So let's go ahead and run the server again. And then we just refresh this query. And it says the field category was declared on Serializer, but has not been included in the field options. So the field category was declared on the Serializer. So it looks like if we go into the Serializer, we can see that we still have this category. So let's get rid of that. So that was in our DRF Serializer. So let's go ahead and refresh. And there we go. So we now are returning multiple items potentially, which match wild plus running plus sneakers. And you can see here that the top option here, and there's 10. Remember, we've paginated by 10. It looks like potentially there's more, or there could be more. And you can see that it works from top to bottom. wild running sneakers. And obviously there's multiple items here because, like I said previously, that one shoe may have multiple colors and sizes. So that will also be associated to the same name. And this is why we get in multiple types. But what's interesting here is we're also returning similar. So here, for example, it says running sneakers. So it's also matching other items or other similar items. So you can see already that this seems like a very good way of implementing a basic search engine. It already has all the tools. It's already providing me other results that are kind of similar. So let's have a look at some of the other tools very quickly. Now, it's worth reading through the documentation here. If you are going to start to utilize Elasticsearch for search, there are lots of different parameters here that can be, and features that can be included. But let's just extend this slightly. So let's go ahead and add something called fuzziness. So this is going to provide us a tool which is going to allow users, for example, to incorrectly enter words, and then Elasticsearch is going to try and work out, based upon what the users typed in, what they might be looking for. So let's go in and finish this. So we're going to need and, because what I'm going to do now is also run another query, if you like, and this time I'm going to set to bool. And then if you remember the products, I only want to output products that are set to is default. So what's happening at the moment is that all the products based upon the name is being printed out, but I only want to show the one that is default. So therefore I only return one product of each rather than all the different items. So the red one, the blue one, etc. So I only want to return one item because in my shop, I only want to return one item because the person will go to that item and then they can see all the different varieties. So let's set this should equals. So here you can see that we're just chaining the queries. So this should queue. Let's go for match this time, and then is default. So we're going to match is default equals true. And yeah, so match equals true. And then let's go for minimum. So what you can do is you can add more here, and you can then use minimum should match, for example. So there may be kind of multiple matches that you want to set up, and the product has to match one or two of them in order to be returned. So I've just set that to 1 because there's only one match. So that should now be ready. So it looks like there's a problem here. So I've basically just forgotten the comma there. I think that will solve it. Yep. Just to re-establish that, so fuzzy query, so returns documents that contain terms similar to the search term. Hopefully that would make sense the first time I told you, but let's go in now and try this again. But this time I'm going to change some of these letters here, for example, and let's see if it returns. And you can see it has returned whilst running sneaker still, and there's only one item because this time I only wanted the is default equals true. So there we have the basic underpinning knowledge to help us start to run queries with Elasticsearch, and then integrating that with DRF. So there were some few things there that I haven't overly explained, and it's well worth just reading through the documentations if you're not too sure, or ask in the comments. I'll try and get back to you. Hopefully that was useful. We're now going to move back to the main project and start, first of all, let's just strip out some of the different components that we've been developing over the last 3 tutorials. And then we're going to then slowly put them back over time, but focusing first on building our inventory application utilizing Django DRF. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.